right, you guys. So just so we're on the same page, we're in mythology, Greek and Roman myth, and to get started, I'll make clear that we're going to be focusing almost exclusively on Greek myth, and there's a good reason for that, because Roman myth really equals Roman religion. Okay, it starts out where, and we are going to spend 1 or 2 days on Roman myth per se near the end of the semester, but you probably already know this, that the Romans, for the most part, adopted and then adapted Greek myth. So they brought in the gods into Rome from Greece, such as Jupiter, who is Zeus, right, or Minerva, Athena, etc. And although there are major differences between the original Greek gods, we'll stick with gods for now, also heroes, okay, Hercules, Heracles, so like that. There are differences between the Greek gods and the Roman gods. So if you're on Jeopardy one day and they ask you, who is the Roman Zeus? And then the answer is, who is Jupiter? That's a wrong answer, okay? It's not an equality. It's not one equals the other. It's one as close as possible to the other, okay? Jupiter is something completely different from Zeus. And we're going to get a little bit into that in this class when we get to Rome. Another thing we're going to get into with Rome, I'm going to start with Rome because that'll be the least of what we do in this class. Somewhere around the end of the semester, I'm going to spend probably one day talking to you about how the Romans adapted not only the gods and the heroes, one by one, but pretty much the whole system of Greek myth, okay, in order to tell, of all things, their early history. So it's interesting. So when you get to Rome, you have an interesting blend between myth and history that you don't see anywhere else, as far as I know, in the world, in human history. Okay, and the reasons for that will become clear when we get to the end of the semester. But for the most part, leading up to that focus on Rome, we're starting from the very beginning with the Greeks. And, like today, I will get started since I'm guessing most of us who are in the class are here. But it is officially just the intro to the class, just to give you some idea about what myth is, actually the word myth has the interesting etymology. Things like that. As far as what the class is going to be about, the book that you need to buy for it is just one book. You need to get it online from any bookstore, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever. It's called Before You Read Homer by me, Brett Robbins, and it is the fruit of 12 years. I woke up one morning after 10 years of teaching this class, and it said, "Hey, wait a minute. I've been teaching this class for so long that I might as well tailor the readings to the class." So there's a good correspondence between the chapters that you read and what we do each day in class. Okay, so we'll spend a whole day on Heracles, and there's a whole chapter on Heracles, etc. Okay, so I think you're going to find a good correspondence between those. Okay, so get that yesterday. Okay, so when you get home tonight, order that baby, preferably 2-day mail. If you don't want to spend that extra amount, don't forget it's so cheap. You might as well do the $3 extra or whatever it is for the 2-day mail. And then just the quicker you get it, the better you'll be off. The better off you'll be. Now, the title, Before You Read Homer, definitely makes a lot of sense because as you'll see in this class, Homer really is the goal of learning the mythology that we do in this class. The ability to be able to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, which for the ancient Greeks, and I will repeat this throughout the semester, you'll never forget this, were not only a kind of Bible for the ancient Greeks, but even beyond that, okay, because it was beyond religion. It was also a secular thing. So secular plus religious Bible for the Greeks, okay. Homer was it, okay, in a way that's, I don't know what we can compare it to. In popular culture, you don't have anything like that. The Beatles in the 60s, all right? I mean, seriously, it was just, I don't know what else to, Nirvana in the 90s, not even, right? Because I was there, and they weren't as big as the Beatles in the 60s. Right, now they're a lot bigger. So the idea here is the myths that we learn, the mythology, I should say, that we learn in this class is going to get you to be able to pick up Homer's Iliad and then the Odyssey, if you wish, and to really understand almost everything you encounter there, okay? Because that is, the stuff that we learn in this class is going to be the stuff that Homer expected his audiences to know, okay? And so that's a valuable thing, right? Another thing is this class pretty much segues into Greek and Roman culture, per se, because Homer stands at the very beginning of Greek history, per se. Okay, there's also a prehistory. and that's where most of the heroes and the gods' stories come from. But Homer, the epic poet Homer, around 750 BC or so, kicks off the beginning of Greek history with the capital H. Okay, so I in the back of my mind, I have the idea that this class kind of dovetails into those classes in a more than purely coincidental way. Okay, because Homer truly is not only the most important anything in ancient Greece, author, but really figurehead of ancient Greece, but also it's at the very beginning, when he composed his epics, at the very beginning of everything as well. And then beyond that, then you start getting into things like the advent of democracy with quotes around it because women weren't counted in it. So if you're interested in Greek culture per se, there will be a lot more of that in those classes than in this one. In this class, it's going to be the stories. It's going to be mainly two things: gods and heroes. That's what this class will be about. Okay, it should almost be called that: the gods and heroes of Greece, and then maybe and Rome in brackets. Okay, now why is that? All right, it all comes down to what gods and heroes are. It all comes down to the very function or the very reason of existence, the reason for being of mythology itself, and that is to. And this is the first, and then kind of the default purpose of mythology, to explain what the hell is going on in the universe. If you're born into a universe where you don't have science yet, okay, we're way pre-science. Okay, science per se doesn't come until about 500 years after Homer. When in its hardcore way, Archimedes and those kind of guys. Okay, we're talking the Hellenistic period, the third and last period of ancient Greek history. But when you're around the time of Homer, you're pretty much waking up and looking at the immense sky and asking, where the heck did it come from? And there's, thunder and lightning, and where did they come from? And you know what I'm saying? So we have to kind of get into that kind of primordial frame of mind to understand why it is that we bother learning about mythology in the first place. Okay, we're talking about the very first people in the West, okay, not in the whole world, but the very first people in the West who are developing civilization and attempting to come to terms with what and why things are. Is that up? Okay. And it all begins, as you'd probably guess, with myths about the universe. So it starts out impersonal. It starts out, Zeus isn't around yet. Okay, it starts out impersonally with the universe itself, and even before that, with what's called chaos. Okay, so according to the most important creation myth of the Greeks that we're going to get to 3 classes from now. Okay, I'll talk about the first 2 classes in a second. We're going to see how the ancient Greeks conceived of the origin of the universe, and just as importantly, how the origin of the universe developed into Zeus and the other Olympians being the masters of Olympus, okay, and by extension of the universe. Okay? And so once we get into that, and we talk about how Zeus became the king of the gods in Olympus, what's called the succession myth, where he succeeds from Uranus and then Cronus and then to Zeus, and Zeus becomes the king of the gods. Then the question is, who are his siblings and who are his kids, the other Olympians? So there are going to be 12 Olympians. So we're going to deal with the Olympians one by one in some cases. In the case of, say, Apollo, he deserves a whole day to himself. Dionysus gets a whole day to himself. And then some other gods and goddesses are going to be kind of paired up. The idea is that we're going to deal with the individual gods after we deal with the origin of the universe, and then we're going to get to the pre-Homeric heroes. We're going to get to the 4 most important heroes after we get to the gods and goddesses. So it'll be Perseus, Heracles, Theseus, and Jason. So those are going to be the 4 heroes that have stories, important stories told about them before Homer comes along. And then we're going to go right into Homer. Okay, so this class incorporates Homer as well. And there are chapters about Homer in the book too. Okay, and so we are going to end with Homer, and I'm going to give you kind of a head start to be able to read him on your own, and hopefully you're going to want to by then, because it'll be kind of like, I don't know a good analogy for it, but you will have gone so far in understanding the backdrop or the background world that Homer expects you to know that it almost would feel like a letdown if you didn't read Homer. You know what I'm saying? You're going to learn all the things you need to know, and then when you read Homer, you're going to pat yourself on the back for, oh my gosh, whoa. They're mentioning Zeus, they're mentioning Hera, they're mentioning Heracles and the relationship between Heracles and Hera and, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be second nature to you by the end of the semester. Okay? Now, another thing that you guys are going to learn is something that when I first started learning mythology, I was kind of a late bloomer to it when I started really getting into mythology. When you go into a museum with a friend or something, or you just find things online, photos of vases or something like that, you're going to quickly be able to identify the different heroes, the different gods, etc. And I remember when I first was blown away by my friend who could name every little thing, and I was just blown away. I was like, how did you do that? It's easier than it looks because, for better or worse, I don't know if this is a good thing or bad thing, but there's almost a trick to it, and that is that there are so few characteristics of the individual gods, goddesses, and heroes that are pretty much always on a vase depicting those gods, goddesses, and heroes that, like, for example, Thunderbolt was Zeus. Okay? If it's a Thunderbolt, it's Zeus. All right? Medusa's head, that's Perseus. Things like that. Okay? You're going to get used to it. We're going to look at lots of photos of vases and wall paintings and sculptures, etc., that depict the various gods, goddesses, and heroes that we look at. And by the way, I'll say gods, and I'll mean gods and goddesses, because that's the way the ancient Greeks did it, and I understand the patriarchal aspect of that, and incorporating the goddesses with that. But I mean, I could just as well say Olympians, okay? Because that's the way the Greeks did it. When they say it, theoi, that's the word meaning pretty much Olympians, the male and the female. Okay, so Olympians is probably the best way to go for that. Okay, so bottom line is you guys are going to be kind of entry-level experts in mythology by the end of the semester if you apply yourself. And what I did in the book is I whittled it down to what I consider to be the most essential information. Okay, so you'll see in the introduction to the book that I straight out say that. I start the very first sentence of the introduction is something like, in the old days when I taught mythology, I made sure to be as comprehensive as I could possibly be. So when we got to Heracles, I dealt with his 12 labors, as kind of gave them equal time. And then I realized, just by paying attention to how much emphasis was given to the various labors of Heracles by the ancient Greeks and Romans, that there were some that were just, for whatever reason, considered to be most important, such as the Nemean lion, the very first of Heracles' labors. So why not focus on the Nemean lion and then a couple others that are really important, and then, blasphemous as it sounds to say, leave out the others. Okay, so it's not as comprehensive as, say, a dictionary of mythology. Okay, it's a primer. It's meant to be an intro to mythology, so that you can take the ball and then expand your knowledge about whatever stuff interests you most, especially if you're doing a paper on it in this class or beyond. Okay, so I'm not trying to pretend to give you a absolutely comprehensive picture of mythology in this class, for the very good reason that it would be impossible. Not only if you had just one semester to do it in, but if you had your whole 4-year college undergrad career to do it in. Why is that? Because there are so many thousands, and I didn't say hundreds, I said thousands, of variations of these stories out there, that it's just, first of all, too maddening to try to, come to terms with it all. But second of all, it's not necessary, because any more than, if you, by the end of the semester, were so into Perseus that you started, using him in stories that you write or something like that. As interesting as that is, maybe the whole world doesn't need to know about it unless it's that damn good, and then, more and more people will learn about it. But if we were to treat the individual stories in ancient Greece, with equal emphasis, it would be a misrepresentation of kind of the way that the Greeks, in a general sense, perceived them. So, that was a segue into saying that every once in a while you guys are going to encounter something on Wikipedia or in a dictionary one place or another that contradicts something that we look at. Bring it up if you wish in class, but do realize that that will almost certainly be a reflection of what I'm talking about right here. It's called variation. Okay, that's the big word. That's the buzzword, variation. Lots and lots of different variations of the same hero, stories about the same hero, the same gods and goddesses. What's the significance of myth in general? I think it really comes down to this idea of archetypes. It comes down to, oh wow, this is kind of a Heracles figure. This is kind of a Jason figure. in a given movie that you see or something like that. You're going to see the guys like George Lucas. When you deal with Star Wars, I mean, my gosh, he's so indebted to myth, and not only myth, but also this guy Joseph Campbell. If you guys are aware of, he's a guy, probably the most famous expounder of myth. He's dead now, but he died not too long ago though, and he wrote all kinds of books that were intended to introduce people to mythology, and Lucas was like worshipped him. I mean, he visited him and said, "Thank you so much for writing this one particular book, Hero of a Thousand Faces." He said, "Star Wars wouldn't have existed without it." Okay, so Lucas, among others, saw myth as a very freeing, very liberating source of stories that they could use in their own stories, and then further perpetuate mythology throughout the ages. And that's what's been going on throughout the ages, right? Even in the Middle Ages, but especially, say, with the Renaissance, the so-called rebirth of Greco-Roman civilization in 15th century Italy and then onwards. You have these people thinking of the Greeks and Romans, not just with mythology, but civilization in general, as, agree with them or not, as the best that there has been so far of Western culture. And so the idea was a rebirth of that, and a rebirth of what? A rebirth of the ideas, the things that we'll be looking at, among other things, in this class. Okay, so you're going to have, I think, if you're a perceptive person and you have a real curiosity, you're going to get lots of light bulb moments in this class throughout the semester. I think throughout the reading and also in class. I think there are going to be moments where, oh wow, okay, that's kind of, maybe that character I really like is very similar to Athena versus Aphrodite, and there's that weird Athena-Aphrodite thing going on, or like I said, Hera and Heracles, named after Hera, by the way, in a very ironic way. I'll get to when we get to Heracles. But I mean, it doesn't make you money directly or anything to know mythology, but it does make you a better informed, cultural agent, going through life and knowing where a lot of the manifestations of ideas come from, as opposed to seeing them and thinking that they come from nowhere. You're going to see lots of recognition of things that you encounter in the media, in various stories, movies, novels, whatever that you read and see, and you're just going to see that there's a real continuity to mythology. It never died. Right? We're still in the mythical age, if you will, and it never will not be the case as long as we continue to be human. And that, not only that, but we're not going to get too much into this stuff, but there are lots of anthropologists who argue that mythology is, the stories of mythology, the various characters who represent different tendencies. I'm bringing up Heracles all day today because he's the most important by far of the ancient Greek heroes. Heracles, what he represents: good, bad, strong, weak, vulnerable, but also heroic. These things, according to someone like Levi Strauss, not the genes guy, but the other guy, these are things that come from, deep in the psyche, in the collective psyche. It's not something that just is picked out of nowhere. These are things that come out of us by virtue of being human. Okay, and so there's that connection, that kind of deep psychological connection to myth that we're not going to get too much into in this class. I'll leave it up to you to take the ball and go with it. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, I'll throw out names like Jung, and then also Campbell, the guy that I mentioned Lucas liked a lot. And you could always email me for resources, bibliography, etc. when it comes to that kind of stuff. But in this class, I'm going to stay more simple. I'm going to stay more straightforward. I want to teach you the stuff that I would want you to teach me if you were the teacher of a class, and and equip me with going out into the world with a sense of being able to say, I have a pretty good understanding of myth and what it has to do with, okay, what it's all about. That's all anyone can ask for from a class like this. And so to that end, I'm going to stick as much as I can, and the book does too, with kind of the orthodoxy of mythology. I'm not, even though I might love Hephaestus more than any of the other Olympians, which I do, I'm not going to spend even a whole day on Hephaestus himself. Why? Because the Greeks wouldn't have. Okay, he's an interesting guy. He's very important, but they would have spent the whole day on Apollo, because Apollo was just ridiculously important in Greek culture. So I'm going to err on the side of orthodoxy when it comes to what we focus on, as opposed to idiosyncrasy. I'm not going to load you guys down with that stuff because you may not be into it as much as I am, or you may not want to try to be into it until you have a better grasp of the basics. And so this is going to be a basics class when it comes to myth, and that's not a patronizing thing to say. It's going to be basics in the best sense of foundation. Okay, and then you can take it as far as you want to. So if you're a writer, if you're a filmmaker, if you're whatever mythology, oh my gosh, it's a language that you're going to be able to apply to your creations, music, etc. Maybe unparalleled, at least any class in classics. So that's kind of just an intro as far as what we'll be covering. All right. So I want you guys to understand that these gods, these heroes, do not come out of nowhere. They come from, and I'm saying come from. I'm not talking about are influenced by. I'm talking about come from civilizations that are at least contemporary with, if not preceding, Greek civilization, and that is Egypt and Mesopotamia. Now, it's pretty close because Greek civilization begins with Minoan civilization on the island of Crete, the southernmost and largest island of Greece. Okay, and it's around 3000 BC or so that starts really kicking off. And if you talk about Egypt, you're talking about 3000 as well. So kind of close to each other. So there's a lot, and there's a lot of trade, by the way, between them, and Mesopotamia as well. So what we're going to do with Egypt is we're going to learn one myth from Egypt that is probably the most important myth, and that is the creation myth of Egypt, where the universe came from the standpoint of the Egyptians. And as you're going to see when we get to the Greek equivalent of that, okay, very similar in lots of ways, okay? Then when we get to Mesopotamia, 2 classes from now, then we're going to look at the myth of Gilgamesh. And that's going to be a story about a hero, the very first world hero, as far as we know, okay? Before any of the Greek ones. And so what we're going to do there is we're going to see how similar the Epic of Gilgamesh is, once we get to the Greek stuff, to the myths of the most important of the Greek heroes that we look at. So Egypt will be for the gods, and Mesopotamia will be for the heroes, in other words. Okay, and that's what this class is about. So it'll be a nice way to get the ball rolling with understanding the Greeks didn't exist in a vacuum, but rather in a larger world. Now, why is China, why is India not paid attention to, despite the fact that they are extreme, and also Mesoamerica, etc., not considered in this picture, for the very simple reason that for the ancient Greeks, which is what this class is about, it was by far, almost exclusively, Egypt and Mesopotamia that were the most important trading partners and sharers of ideas for the Greeks. Okay, so those are the two, that's why I'm singling out those 2 cultures. Okay, so I think you're going to find it interesting to go from Egypt and Mesopotamia on into Greece, and you'll just see what kind of foundation the Egyptians and Mesopotamians laid down for the Greeks. So we're going to start with that and then go into almost nothing but Greece from that point on, although, like I said, near the end, we're going to get into some Roman stuff as well.